Well, there's two things I think to consider. So one is when we think about what happens with the economy over time, there's an amazing amount of continuity in some of the things that move the economy. And three things are worth highlighting. One, obviously, this dependence on semiconductors and the impact of that. And that's been something, if you look at TSMC, it's been the largest stock on the stock market in Taiwan for more than 20 years now. That hasn't changed. The second thing, when we think about what the structure of the economy, the external surplus is very big, the current account surplus is double-digit level of GDP. That's also something that's been building up over time, and that gets reflected in a currency which in many respects is still very cheap. And again, that's not something that really changes over the course of time in Taiwan, regardless of the government. So those things I think are important. And the third thing, particularly when we look at some of the local issues that are being discussed in the election about things like welfare spending and people's livelihood, when you look at tax revenue and expenditure, the size of the government in Taiwan, it also remains very small relative to other economies. So all of these things, regardless of the administration, they remain a very strong political consensus around that's the way the economy should run. Now, what could have an impact this time around, I think it's less about the politics per se, and it's more about where we stand with the cycle in Taiwan. That over the course, Taiwan's been through a big recession in the export sector over the course of the last 18 months or so. If you look at things like the PMIs in Taiwan, they're much weaker than the industrial cycle has been in the rest of the region. And yet right now, unemployment is still at a 20-year low, core inflation is at a 20-year high, and it's now looking like the export sector is coming out of recession. So I think in that respect, there is something different this time around, and that gives the political parties an opportunity, I think, that whoever comes into power tomorrow, they have an opportunity where the economy starts to look a bit different in the cyclical respect from where it's been previously.
Now, you mentioned earlier about TSMC and its dominance in semiconductors. It makes up 40% of the island's exports. Now, could the strength also be Taiwan's Achilles tendon? So
I think that's the issue that politicians really should be discussing more. And obviously, different administrations try to diversify the economy away a little bit in terms of trying to encourage more industries to grow. But this would seem to be a very important issue for Taiwan. 40% of exports are now semiconductors. A lot of those are still going to China. And so if you have a situation where China does develop the capacity to make semiconductors itself, the impact on Taiwan's economy is going to be very large. So that is something which I think politicians really should be discussing. That said, I mean, obviously when you look at TSMC, the impact it's had on the economy, without the growth of that company, Taiwan's economy would look like a very different place to where it is today. And particularly during COVID, the economy here did very well in the first couple of years, precisely because of companies like TSMC selling tech to the rest of the world. So, as you said, an Achilles heel is something which is the strength of Taiwan. But looking forward, there does need to be a plan of how the economy starts to diversify away from that, given the risks that particularly mainland China might develop the capacity to make semiconductors itself.